So if you guys are thinking about buying a home this year, there's a few things you got to think about when you're getting that process started. And I think one of the first things you could do, one of the first things to get the ball rolling is setting up your team. And the main pieces of your team are going to include your real estate agent and your lender. And so those are two huge pieces. And as you're going through, you're like, well, I'm kind of like a year out. I don't want to start those conversations. There's a few reasons why, why not? It's as you're reaching out to an agent or a mortgage lender or a mortgage broker, there's no upfront costs. There's nothing until your home actually closes. So you get that support, you get, somebody to contact to. Obviously you're looking, if you're thinking about buying a home, even if you're not, people are like looking on Zillow and Redfin and all those sites, kind of diving into neighborhoods and figuring out what they like, what they don't like. But there's a big process that goes behind that as well. And that's what we're going to dive into a little bit today with Amir. He's a mortgage broker right here in San Diego. Dive into what that looks like and give you guys some insight into how that initial conversations look, some do's and don'ts, and get that ball rolling as you are starting your home search right here in San Diego. As always, I'm Chris Erickson, and we got a real estate crew right here in San Diego. If you're thinking about making a move, all of our contact info is right below. And actually right below as well is our buyer's guide that has a full breakdown of the process. So get that downloaded and dive in and then reach out with any questions. But like I said, number one, reach out to build your team. So Amir here has been in the business for a long time. He has helped a lot of our clients with this process. And like I said, sometimes they're 2 years out. We do a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of relocation clients, and they need a little bit more runway. So maybe it's 2 years out. We're having them get in contact. Actually, right before we hopped on, somebody who reached out on YouTube just called Amir to set up an appointment to start that conversation. And he's a ways off right now. So what does Amir, as that people are reaching out, they're a little nervous. They're like, I don't want to start getting all my stuff. And, I'm a little bit the ways out. Kind of initial conversation. What does that look like? What are people providing? What if a new home buyer that knows kind of nothing about it, what does that look like for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, here's the way, before we dive into those details, I want you to think of it in terms of like planning a vacation, right? You may think about like a destination that you want to go to, but now you have to come up with all the compartmentalized functions to be able to get there, right? You have your flight, you have your hotel, you got to pack your bags. These are all the things that are precursors before you actually jump on the plane and get to your destination, right? And some of those things require you to plan ahead of time. And so buying a home, no different, right? And so the two components, obviously, that you're going to need is you're going to be able to get the house, right? Find a house, right? And that's where you guys come in, finding the house, the right neighborhoods, etc. But the other component is like the financing component. You have to make sure that your financing is lined up. And oftentimes I talk to people about a big purchase in their life being a vehicle, right? And so if you're going to finance a vehicle, like, what does that process look like? Well, you go look at cars, you try to figure out like, which car do I want to buy? And then you might go out and test drive it. And you're going to do all these things before you ever line up the financing. Because the reason being is if you have decent credit, you walk into a car lot, you make a unilateral decision on which car you want to leave with. It doesn't matter what the payment is. They're going to give you the loan if you have good credit, right? With mortgages, it's a little bit different, right? Because after the 2008 crisis, you have to now qualify for the mortgage. So you may be looking at $700,000 homes as opposed to $1 million homes when you actually qualify for the $1 million home, and you're already nixing that out of your options where you necessarily don't have to. And then of course the other side of that is you may be looking at $1.3 million homes, but you really need to be looking at $1.1 million homes when you're talking about obtaining financing to be able to get approved for that. And so, a great first step when you're thinking about these things is, first and foremost, get aligned with the real estate agent, right? To get aligned with somebody like you guys. Make sure that like guys like like, hey, I'm in the market. I want to buy a home. Like, this is what I'm looking for. That way you guys can get to work and make sure that what they're asking for is realistic as far as what's available, but simultaneously dialogue starting with the mortgage broker to make sure that, look, I can actually get qualified for a mortgage. If I work with Chris, I work with Cassidy, I know that if I find a house, I can execute on that purchase. And that's what the pre-approval process is for. Now, a lot of people get scared about going through the pre-approval process for whatever given reason. There's a myriad of reasons as why somebody might be a little bit anxious about that. But really what it is it allows you to understand what your options are. So you want to think of it in terms of like, you're not going to get a loan right away to be able to buy a home. Nobody's going to write you a check for $1 million. But what you're lining up is the fact that should you find the home, the $1 million is sitting behind you to fund that purchase, make sure that you can get the keys to that home. So going through the process of understanding what you can get approved for is just as much of a critical step as finding a home.
Yeah. And are they, so as they're reaching out there, we tell a lot of people reach out, like I said, year out, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Start that conversation with you. In that initial part, are they having to provide all their documents? Are they having to get everything to you? Or is it more of here's where we stand, here's what we're looking for? Is that realistic?
It's a little bit of both, right? And it really depends on the circumstance. So if I talk to somebody, let's just say they're like a year out, we might do some preliminary legwork, but maybe not check their credit because their credit report will expire by the time that they're going to purchase, making sure that there's no glaring issues with their income or documentation, things of that nature. And that way they know, hey, when that time comes, all the preliminary stuff looks great. Now, whenever we get to that year timeline, we'll know what you qualify for based on whatever the rates and the markets look like at that point in time, right? However, let's just say the timeline's condensed to 6 months, right? And I'm looking in 6 months from now. Sometimes, especially if somebody has some questions about what they can get approved for, or if they're going to get approved, it actually makes sense to go through that process ahead of time at that beginning part. Even though they're not looking to purchase in 6 months, this way they know if there's anything that they need to fix or address on their credit report, anything they need to handle with their income or their documentation, they're not trying to do that in the 11th hour. They're doing that now. They're getting their ducks in a row now, and that's going to help them understand exactly what it is that they can line up and purchase.
Yeah, and just going through that, even that conversation of, maybe it's not pulling credit, but having that conversation takes a lot of stress out of it and gives you a little, okay, here's kind of zoning in what you're looking at. A lot of people that we're working with, they're looking at different neighborhoods, we're looking at different price points, but this helps give you a target. Okay, well, maybe we're not going to go there. It's just not going to work out. Maybe we kind of focus over on this side over here. Another thing that people are looking at, I'm just looking for homes. I'm right here in San Diego. Why don't I just go to my bank? I know you're a mortgage broker. There's banks out there as well. You can go to your local bank. You go to, where you keep your cash. What's the difference between those? A lot of people just think, okay, I'm getting a loan. Loan A is the same as loan B. What's the kind of main difference that people might want to know about that?
Yeah. So the big difference between banks and brokers happens to be the mortgage rate and the mortgage deal that you get. You end up getting a better deal with a mortgage broker. Now, this is counterintuitive to like what it is that we're used to seeing, because usually when you think about mortgage broker, you think middleman, and we have been trained our whole lives to eliminate the middleman, and that'll save you costs, right? It's true in just about every realm except for mortgages, right? With mortgages, it's different because with mortgage brokers have access to wholesale rates. And think of that like access to Costco with the special membership that only mortgage brokers have, right? And so customers end up getting a better deal when they go in the direction of brokers. And they've done some analysis. Last year, basically, it was to the tune of $12,000 difference, right? And that means that like there could be a difference in rate, in points, in costs. It can mean a myriad of things, but you basically get a better deal with a mortgage broker. But the other component is banks have a very limited box that they want to have you fit inside of, right? Like, so if you meet their guidelines, you meet what they're looking for, cool, they'll give you a loan. Unfortunately, the person that you're talking to at the bank may not be transparent with you and tell you, hey, even though you don't qualify with us, you would qualify with the mortgage broker. And some great examples of this are people that are self-employed. Maybe somebody's self-employed and they write off all their income. A bank's not going to do that loan, right? And some businesses, look, they take advantage of the tax code. They write off a substantial amount of their income, right? But there's a difference between what's on their tax returns and what their quality of life looks like, right? And so in real life, they can afford the $2 million home. But on paper, it looks like they can't afford $200,000, right? Well, mortgage brokers have a solution for this type of stuff, right? And like that's another reason is like you may not fit inside of this finite box that the banks want you to fit inside of, right? The other thing is that banks are going to lever up their reputation, right? Like everybody's heard of Bank of America. Everybody's heard of Chase, right? Like, I mean, I bank with both of those institutions, right? You know them because they're all over the news. They're all over your ads and they're a household name, right? And so they know that, right? But those advertising dollars are paid for somehow. And one of those ways that they're paid for is by increased margins on their mortgage products, right? And so they're great for deposits. They're great for storing your money. They're great for a lot of different things. But even Jamie Dimon 3 years ago said that banks should get out of the mortgage business, right? This is coming from the CEO of the biggest bank in the United States saying, hey, we're really not that great at mortgages. These are his words, right? And he said with the compliance, the regulatory framework, and what the costs are associated with it, like, I'm not sure that banks should be involved in this. And so that gives you a little canary in the coal mine, is the fact that even these banks know that they are not competitive in that space.
And there's also, as people are getting their mortgage, as they're starting this process, there's a few things maybe to do and to don't. Let's say you're 6 months to a year out. Can you cover some of those, just some, so people can kind of start planning that in advance? Obviously, if they're watching this, hopefully they're reaching out to us. We're putting them in touch with you, but just give them a little insight into kind of some do's and don'ts when thinking about purchasing a home this year.
Yeah, good. That's great. So, I'm going to bucket this into two different compartments here. The first is what you can control. The second is what you can't control, right? So the low hanging fruit is what you can't control, right? Like, if you are a salaried employee, you can't control additional income there, right? Like, you may or may not get the raise. You may or may not get the promotion. These are things that are really outside of your control, right? But what you can control is what your debt structure looks like, right? And so things that you do want to do is you want to make sure that your credit cards have low balances in relation to the limit. Why? Because the lower the balance in relation to the limit, the more positively it reflects on your credit score. This is probably the biggest hot button. A lot of people think that if I have a credit card, I'm paying it off on time every single month, that this should reflect really well on me, right? Well, if you have a $8,000 limit on your credit card and every month that balance is getting to $7,000, even though you're paying it off at the end of the month, you're hurting your credit, right? And so one thing is keeping the credit card balances really low. The second thing is no big purchases that you're going to finance, meaning don't go buy a brand new car. Don't go finance a boat. Don't go finance a trailer. These things can really stand in your way from being able to purchase a home. But the solution there is, if you do need the car, you do need the boat, you do need the trailer, okay, buy the house first, because the qualifications to get those types of loans are not as rigorous as a mortgage is concerned.
Like I said, number one, build your team, get that all in order. It's never really too early to get that process started. And right down below, we have all this information. I'll have Amir's information down there if you just want to reach out directly to him as well. But we also have our buyer's guide, so feel free to download that. It's got Amir's information in there as well, plus some of these do's and don'ts, and then a lot of the entire process of buying a home, from getting pre-approved all the way through closing, what that entirety looks like, give you a little bit of perspective and give you a little bit of kind of idea of what to expect going forward. So get that downloaded, all in the description below. I'm Chris Erickson. We got a real estate crew right here in San Diego, and we got your back when making the move here in San Diego.